So it seems that vehicles are getting a much needed boost to their survivability in 10th edition, and with a large swathe of new weapon abilities like the anti-vehicle 3+ we saw in the Chain Fist for the Terminators, it seems appropriate that the vehicles you can now bring in the game will be a bit beefier and take a few more hits to bring down. And it does seem that in the new edition of 40k, everything is getting a bump. The Rhino, which is an example they show off in the Warhammer community article today, the humble workhorse of the Imperium, has now gone from its current Toughness 7 3-up save profile to a very solid Toughness 9 in the new edition. It still has 10 wounds and a 3-up save, so that part of the profile hasn't changed, but it has also gained the new datasheet abilities that we've seen in the other profiles. It's got a leadership score of 6, which seems to be relatively standard on the Marine profiles that we've seen so far, and an objective control score of 2, meaning that it can try and ram some enemy squads off objectives and claim them for itself just that little bit easier. But the big thing, of course, is that move to Toughness 9, which is a really great boost, and considering they say the Rhino is still going to be sort of the lesser vehicle for the Marines, one of the weaker vehicles for the Marines, that boost to Toughness 9 on the Rhino chassis does mean I think it's going to be a lot more durable on the battlefield, and just to be able to survive a lot more light and mid-range firepower. It's still going to be vulnerable to the heavy hitting stuff, but being able to survive the chip damage from things like heavy bolters and autocannons that much better is going to be really crucial for it staying alive over the course of a game. They also show a few rules off in the datasheet which are familiar to many players but which have been notably absent for a little while. First up, we have the self-repair rule, which means that Rhinos auto-heal a wound in each of your command phases, which will just help them keep on trucking all game long and really help add to their durability, essentially in a best case scenario, giving them an extra 5 or 6 wounds over the course of the game. There is also a new name for the explosion mechanic. This is again GW's way of condensing and simplifying a load of things down just so that it's easier to see and understand and get all the information you need from the unit's own datasheet rather than having to scroll through other books and other rules. The explosion mechanic is now called Deadly Demise, and what this means essentially is that on a 6, when a vehicle dies, much like now, it explodes basically, again, much like now, and does the Deadly Demise amount of damage to units around it. So for a Rhino, as you can see, that is Deadly Demise D3, so when it dies, if you roll a 6, it will do D3 mortal wounds to enemy units around it. And sorry, I said enemy units, but presumably it will actually just be any units. This will probably still be a mechanic that can hurt you if it blows up in your lines. I don't know why I said enemy units, but D3 mortal wounds to all units, presumably, around the exploding vehicle. It also has the firing deck 2 rule, which means it gives 2 embarked passengers the chance to fire out of the top hatch. This is a really great rule to see back in the game. It was always really fun back in sort of 6th and 7th edition to have a tactical squad with a missile launcher and a plasma gun firing out of the top hatch as the Rhino drove your squad around. It does look as though you will be able to do this again in 10th edition, which is great for adding some firepower to your squad whilst they are safely cooped up in a Rhino, and potentially makes things like the Impulsor really good if it has a firing deck of 5, considering it is pretty much an open-topped vehicle. Being able to fire 5 Hellblasters out of the top of that as it rides around could be quite a powerful mechanic in the game. We also get to see some weapon profiles in the article today. In melee, the Rhino actually hits on 4s now, which is a bit of a hilarious surprise. I do quite like that. It has 3 attacks at strength 6 with 0 AP and 1 damage with its tracks. I mean, it's still not a good profile, but you know, there it is. It does hit on 4s rather than 5s or 6s now. It hits on 2s with its Hunter Killer missile, which has had a fairly nice glow up. It's also strength 14 now, which sounds bonkers, but again, we've got to remember this is a rule for 10th edition, so with the general boost in toughness for all the vehicles, this won't be quite as scary as it initially looks. Although being strength 14, it does mean that even the new Orc Stomper, which they say is toughness 14, you will still be wounding that on 4s, so it can do a good bit of damage, and it will be wounding most other vehicles on 3s, I think, for that potential d6 damage. Elsewhere in the article, they also show us a few other vehicles for the Space Marines and their boosted profiles. The Storm Speeder is now toughness 9 like the Rhino. The Gladiator hits a very healthy toughness 10 to make it all but impregnable against almost all light and medium firepower, including things like autocannons and heavy bolters. And the Repulsor gets a huge boost, jumping to a whopping toughness 12. So assuming the wounding mechanic stays the same as it is in 9th, that means anything which is strength 6 or under is only going to be wounding the Repulsor on 6s. It essentially means that things like missile launchers will be needing 5s to wound them now, whereas they were needing, or they are needing, 4s at the moment. It is of course worth mentioning again, there is the new anti-vehicle keyword that we've seen on things like the Chain Fist. Things like Melter and Fusion, maybe even Lascannons, will probably have that keyword, so they will have a much easier time wounding vehicles despite this increased toughness. They will probably be anti-vehicle 4+ for Lascannons, I'm going to say, and then anti-vehicle 3+ for things like your Melter. So it seems to me that vehicles in general are going to be a lot more durable against anything from a bolter to, say, an autocannon. But things tougher than that will probably have the rules to get round this improved toughness. So it does create a bit of a gap between that medium strength firepower and that high strength firepower, which has always been a bit of a sore spot. It's always been the case before where it's been better to go for like a high rate of fire strength 7 gun instead of a one-shot strength 8 gun, whereas now there may actually be a valid choice to make. Do you go for that high rate of fire gun but need 5s or maybe even 6s to wound, or rely on the 1 or 2 shots but have that anti-vehicle 3+ keyword to help you wound that much more easily? Overall though, I think it is a great change. It's good that they are expanding the datasheet numbers beyond just 1 to 10. It would be great if they did this on infantry as well, I think, because there is still a lot of infantry in the game that feels very tied into that T3 to T5 category, and I think they could maybe expand that out a bit more as well. But for vehicles anyway, this is looking like a very solid buff, I think, and in general is going to make them much sturdier in 10th edition. So that's going to be it for today. What do you make of these new vehicle rules? Is it enough to make you consider a mechanized force? And what do you think we will see for things like Imperial Knights, Leman Russ battle tanks, and maybe even Baneblades? Let me know down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later guys.